In order to get into today's talk, I need to take you down my rabbit hole for the week, or actually the last couple of weeks. And it started with, I meet with a group of ladies a couple times a month online. And it's a year-long spiritual exploration session. And these ladies are literally from all over the world. One from Australia, and one from Mexico City, one from Tennessee, literally all over the world. And the question I was posed by a couple people in the group was, how can there be evil in a universe that's built on love? And how do we deal with that? Big question. We had a really neat discussion, but it sent my brain on the rabbit hole of trying to find, because our answer is, well, it's our choice, right? It's our choice on how we deal with that love of the universe. And yet, there's something lacking in the meat of that answer. And that was pointed out to me. They're like, well, you could go all over the place with that answer. So let's get more into it. And anytime you put something out into the universe that you want to know more about, it's going to come back to you in 100 different ways right after you send that out there. So these are some of the things I noticed right after we had that discussion. One, we all know that there's a big conflict in Palestine and Israel right now. People are literally killing each other. But across one of my feeds, there was actual cell phone footage of somebody in the middle of that. So what you heard in the background was children screaming. And then another one, video footage of a child running after and calling for dad while dad's friends were carrying him. Dad had passed. So it's like, can we really say that there's no real evil when you're seeing things and actually hearing people in that kind of distress in real time? And then I was led to the fictional type stories right after that. So that was rolling around in my head for a couple of days, didn't know what to do with those images. And my son asked to watch a next Star Trek. So we've been watching Star Trek: The Next Generation. We've been trying to watch all of them. And he asked to see one night, and it happened to be that the next episode we were on was about a gentleman who many years before had negotiated for hostages to be released off of one planet. But in order to do so, he met the demands of the person that was holding the hostages. That person wanted arms that were more superior than his rivals. But not only did he give him the arms, the weapons, he gave his rivals the same exact weapons. And in the negotiator's mind at that time, he thought, well, I'm going to give everybody a balance of power, and then there'll be nothing to fight about. And yet the choice was made on the part of the person that was most angry and wanted revenge to use those weapons. And they went 40 years of a civil war on that planet. Part of the discussion in that episode was personal responsibility, right? So even if somebody made it possible for you to do bad things with these weapons, you still chose to use that opportunity. So the idea of personal responsibility in the midst of overwhelming circumstance was now laid on the table. And that's a neat discussion to have with 12 and 13-year-olds that are watching the TV with you. In fact, also a couple days before that, in the week, my one son, and I know I've told you before, they struggle with societal type norms, and they just that's part of their struggle. And yet there's still a personal choice in that when you know better. So he had done some things in class that were little teeny things, but he knew that it would catch, it would irk the substitute teacher in the room. He knew that. So he told me they were asked to write on paper to write out their stuff on paper. Well, he chose to write it on his iPad, which is digital paper, he's telling me. but you get the idea. It's these teeny weeny things that you know better, but because there's a perceived slight, so in his mind, a month before when he had the same substitute, she was not kind to him in his brain. So he was going to do whatever he could in that instance to assert his own power. So we got to talk about, you know what? That's not cool to do even those tiny things, because that's a big slippery slope, right? It doesn't matter what we think somebody else did to us. We don't do something that we know is going to bug the heck out of them, you know, just to do that, to bug them. So again, it's personal responsibility. And then he says to me, he's like, so you are comparing what I did to somebody that chooses to do violence? I'm like, it's a slippery slope. It is a real slippery slope. And they have actual scientific data to show how slippery the slope is. So there's been a few studies. Let me find the one for you. One was by Stanley Milgram in the 1963. So the subjects in this, almost all of them were male just because of the time period. So I'll set the stage here. It's 1963, and Stanley Milgram is choosing to study what justifications people have for things like genocide. So we're a little bit out of the time of World War II, and people recognizing that whole groups of people were really atrocious to another whole group of people. And he's like, and a lot of these people said, well, I was following orders. And he wanted to know, is that a justification? Is that really true? Do people really think that way? So he set up an experiment in which people were brought in, and one was a teacher and one was the learner. And the teacher had to make sure that the learner was saying the right answers. So they took the learner and put the learner in another room, right? So that the teacher could hear them, right? And they hooked them up to the electric little gizmos so that they would receive an electric shock if they had the wrong answer. So the teacher had to administer this electric shock. So if the person got a wrong answer, they started with something like 15 volts, which is hardly nothing, right? And it went all the way up to 450 volts, where somebody's literally screaming. And it would go in increments of 15 volts each every time somebody said a wrong answer, so that the teacher would hear somebody make a noise, scream, be in discomfort. And anytime they wanted to stop, somebody in the program would say something like, please continue. There was 4 statements they used only. One was, please continue. One was, the experiment requires you to continue. One is, it is essential for you to continue. And the last one is, you have no other choice but to continue. So if somebody said, I'm not doing this anymore, this is not right, I'm not going to hurt somebody else because I got a wrong answer, they would say one of these words. They found out, they asked a group of psychologists, social workers, what do you think the percentage was of people that would follow all the way through to 450 volts? And a lot of them said 1%, 2%. You'd have to be a total crazy person in order to do that to somebody else. And yet they found in this study, 65%, 2/3 of the people, when given these prompts in this situation, would follow the orders and go all the way through. Kind of amazing. There's another gentleman who does more contemporary work. His name is Philip Zimbardo, and he actually started his experiments, well, I didn't write it down, but either late 60s or early 70s. He did it's kind of famous now, the Stanford Prism experiment, and he's also written books called The Lucifer Effect and Man Interrupted. He did something similar. He took a group of people, college students, that they had they had talked to ahead of time. They had decided that they were of sound mind. They were, quote, good people, you know, and they made half of them prisoners and half of them guards. And they put them in a fake prison situation. The ones that were dressed up like guards immediately started showing superiority to the ones that were dressed up like the inmates. In fact, so much so, there was so much going on in such a short amount of time that they stopped the experiment after 36 hours because 4 of these people involved in the program out of, I think, 8 total, maybe 10, actually had emotional breakdowns. They're like, well, this experiment is out of control. We need to stop this. And what they found was when people are in this group setting and they are feeling like it has to be part of the group. So they started to recognize it's not only our individual makeup, right? But it's also a societal makeup. It's also a group makeup. It's also what kind of organization we are involved in, and all of this stuff comes into play. And yet there are people, they call it rising above and being the hero, where you can make that choice of self-mastery and spiritual presence, which is the definition Charles Fillmore gives for power. Self-mastery and spiritual presence is that definition for power, that part of our soul that radiates with the good, it's power. So if that's the case, then if we go back to the original question that took me down the rabbit hole, evil would be the abuse of that power and of that talent and of that gift. And the ignorance of it. Because in almost all these studies I have been reading or listening to the last couple of weeks, one word is repeated over and over, and that is ignorance. Ignorance in self, ignorance in one's own power of authority, you know, the whole gamut. Ignorance of what's really going on. Ignorance in that you don't have to do a thing in order to get a certain result. There is always another choice. Always another choice. So in the case of Zimbardo and his work, he breaks evil up into different categories. He's like, there's individual evil, stuff we choose on an individual basis. Situational, which means you might have good people, but they're put into, he calls it a bad barrel, right? So it's not bad apples, it's good apples put into a bad barrel. So whatever it is in that organization or the setup that those people are in creates a situation in which they choose bad things. It doesn't excuse them, but at least there's some kind of framework he's recognizing. And then he goes farther than that. Not only do you have sometimes bad barrels, but sometimes you have bad barrel makers. And he uses systems in that category. There's one huge system and I want to show this as a part of heroism and the power of self-mastery and spiritual presence, is that when we open to that inner nature and those spiritual instincts and we trust our internal guidance system, that's when the hero in us emerges. That's when the power becomes most present. And we look for ways then to actually act out that internal presence and that internal power. So they found it in some cases of some of these most egregious, and there's some other real-time studies, but they found that it only takes one person sometimes, and we call them sometimes whistleblowers, whatever, we give them like this derogatory term, but these are the people that see it and say, you know what, I don't care what's going on with all of these people, this thing is not correct and I need to say something, you know. And it's the idea of expanding that, the 65% that are willing to go along, and expand that 1/3 that are not into a category of hero instead of whistleblower, right? Caroline Meese says, what it boils down to is what our relationship is to the divine and whatever our word is for that. So, you know, and I know we know in this building, we can use all the words, right? Whatever your bent is. What is your relationship to the divine, to spirit, to God, to your internal self? Are we in, do we see the world or our situation as a crisis or an opportunity? You know, and if we're recognizing it as a crisis, we're more apt to abuse that power in some way and not choose something that's loving. What are these internal actions that we have within us? Matthew 6:6 says, you abide within me, you are alive there now. You have all power. You are now the answer I desire. You do now radiate yourself from the center of my being to the circumference, out into the visible world as the fullness of my desire. So you abide within me, you are alive there now. You are that presence. You know, that power is there. It's like, are we willing to recognize it, actually shine it to the circumference of all creation? Can we be still, relax, breathe? Matthew 7:8 says, everyone who asks, receive. So if we ask in those moments where we're feeling the crisis instead of the opportunity, you know, that will be shown. And then it's like, do we recognize that we have the grace and that power of love to actually choose to not use power in an adverse way? There are a group of people that again, it's just been within the last 2 weeks, I've learned these people and they're just amazing. It's called the Rainbow Railroad. So, and they help in 70 countries in our world. The LGBTQ community is criminalized. So there's actually state sanctioned adversity towards them. They can be jailed, they can be tortured, they could be, you know, excommunicated from their congregations. It's just not a happy place to be. And this Rainbow Railroad gets people out of these situations. So somebody can request, or they can be made aware of somebody in this type of crisis. They've gotten people out of literal torture situations because they are LGBTQ. And they offer a chance of relocation, asylum. They help them fill out the paperwork in countries that are not persecuting so that they can actually live a life, any kind of life. I mean, some of the stuff I saw, they were literally helping people get out of literal sewers because that's where they were only safe place for them to be in their communities. These are the heroes. These are the people that are using their power of love in a way to help others. It's crazy to think, but just since January 1st of this year, almost 1,300 people have requested help from this Rainbow Railroad. So you think about that. And these are people that, I mean, this is a fairly new organization. That they're, you know, it's a way to help people, you know, a way to be a real-time hero, to say, you know what, you don't need to be persecuted because of who you are. Let's find you a place where you're safe. And are we willing to do that with each other? Also, in the past week, I've heard somebody say to me, I can't hire somebody because of their political affiliation. Really? 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 Are we that stuck in where we are at sometimes to just cut somebody off because of the label that they're using, and forgetting that we have this internal truth? The Father and I are one, God and I are one, the Spirit and I are one. I don't know how many of you seen this little book called Lessons in Truth. I'm just going to read a paragraph out of it. It says, the Lord is the Lord within our own being. The Lord is the Christ of our own being. There is one Spirit, one Father of all, in us all, but who manifests uniquely in each of us. Your Lord is He who will deliver you out of your troubles. Your Lord has no other business but to manifest himself to you and through you, and so make you mighty with his own mightiness made visible, whole with his health, perfect by showing forth the Christ perfection. Standing in the place of intellect or conscious mind, we thus look to spirit. Spirit flows in and illumines intellect, making it see its oneness with spirit. And then we, conscious mind, stand at the center and looking from within outward say, the Father and I are one. I am spirit, and spirit is in me. God and I are one. And if we really take that into our power, we're willing to find those other ways, even in the little ones. I mean, I know I've talked about some really big things that are happening in the world, but even the little ones, like my son choosing whether he's going to write on paper or his iPad, and the reason for his choice. You know, sometimes it's the reason for the choice. Are we on purpose setting out to hurt somebody else or to not listen at all? I'll close with a couple thoughts from Thich Nhat Hanh. He says our spiritual power comes from 5 different places, maybe 6. He adds a 6th one on. He said, first, it's confidence. It's like, do we really feel empowered by that recognition that we are one with the universe? Do we have the confidence to bring that forward into everything? Diligence, saying, you know, are we cultivating that on a daily basis, even in our tiny little decisions? You know, do we do that on a daily basis, or recognize that we're at least trying to do that on a daily basis? He says that actually cultivates happiness when we are diligent in recognizing our confidence. Mindfulness, and I love his vision for mindfulness, it's watering our roots. So not only when we diligently water our roots, and we recognize what's coming up. So when it comes up and it's flourishing, are they the weeds? Do we want them there or not? And he says, you know what? We have to sit with all the roots. We have to sit with them all and recognize everything that's in us, and then persuade the ones that show that love and that diligence to stay and grow taller. And those are the ones that we fertilize with the good. And he calls that concentration. So we have confidence, diligence, mindfulness, concentration, and then insight or wisdom, which is that liberating part. And he says, by ignorance we suffer. Again, that word ignorance. And some of us choose ignorance. That's the thing. Some of us actually choose not to try to water the good part, right? And just let it happen. And even in Thich Nhat Hanh's dissertation on this, he calls all of this the foundation of happiness. And if happiness and joy, if we do these things, which really, it's work, but it's not impossible work, right? It's work, but it's not impossible work. Happiness and joy, if we are feeding and recognizing and growing that happiness and joy, then we don't have any reason to abuse the power in terms of others. You know, we don't need to try to find our fulfillment through somebody else's unhappiness. And again, it comes from these tiny little things. Letting go. Thich Nhat Hanh's last comment on the matter was, letting go is powerful. Letting go is powerful because we're not living in the past. That's part of the letting go. That we look for outcomes, we water the roots, and that's the future, that's the now, that's the present moment. And then we wish that for others and help them figure out how to water their own roots, like that Rainbow Railroad is doing, giving people an opportunity. I'm going to end with this prayer of power, which you can find in that centered book. Divine Spirit, grant that I may rest in the sweet assurance of your presence now. Let me feel the peace and power of your love as I turn my awareness away from the outer and into the stillness within me. I listen intently for divine instructions to direct my choices and words so they may vibrate with love and life. Let any remnant of fear, anger, or control transform into the nothingness of God ideas, so that I may take hold of the creativity and spiritual awareness I need to live an inspired life, no matter what. I lay claim on the all-good quality of spirit that is mine right now, and I speak with the power and authority that has been given to me into the world and affairs of myself and all others, affirming all is well. Amen.